Hello, welcome to my Fireside Chat. Today is International Women's Day. It's a very important day. And this year, the campaign theme is called Break the Bias. In accordance with the theme, Break the Bias, International Women's Day organizers are asking people to use this pose, cross the arms, and make the commitment of breaking the bias. Break the bias. What does it mean? Because I find that bias is somehow naturally, when we grew up from our environment, from our experience, we already have this bias naturally. We are going to learn today from our very special and experienced speaker. She is sharing her experience, talking about how can we be aware and focus on breaking the bias at workplace and also in personal life. Today, we have a very special guest from Toronto, not too far from me, only 3 hours time difference. Shari Thompson-Ricci. She is an experienced educator, innovative, and also very positive educator working at University of Toronto. And her main focus is in the field of social justice, youth, and also adult education. And she always apply her knowledge and also do a lot of work about anti-racism. Without further ado, I'm going to let her introduce her background. Thank you very much, Shari.
Thank you so much, Agnes. I am super honored and humbled to be here with you. And you were able to share briefly where my focus is and where my passion lies. Has always been in social justice. I've been a secondary school teacher for over a decade and an educator for that time period, but I was not limited to the classroom. I've done a lot of community work in various spaces and in different parts of the world. I'm honored to even work in human rights area in Hong Kong, where Agnes and myself have met.
Yes.
And that's where, I was able to expand on my understanding of social action and justice and what that looks like and how we can educate not only in the spaces of a classroom, but also in community. So that's definitely a passion of mine. And I have been able to take that passion and work in spaces such as healthcare. And then more recently, I've been in higher education where I am working in an EDI, or as some of you may know it as DEI capacity. So, I'm kind of find myself all over the place, but it's just because I'm just so passionate about equity and diversity and belonging.
Yeah, that's great. By the way, I got inspired by Shari a few months ago last year, and we had a talk about EDI. And I say, can you share with me about EDI? And then she got a very, very thorough introduction about EDI, how great it will be help corporate. So I also learned a few different certificates to equip myself to know more. Shari, can you share with us how you choose to focus on the area of EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion at your career?
So yes, that's a great question. I'm happy to answer it. I do want to begin by letting everyone know, what sacred land that I am on before we continue with this. And because this is very much so centered around the work that I do, is obviously understanding my privilege and the fact that I have the opportunity to live on the sacred land of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This is the territory which was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunees that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and people, settlers and newcomers have been invited into the same treaty in a spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. So I hold so much gratitude and the opportunity to work and live on Turtle Island. So with that being said, this is very much so land acknowledgement, understanding histories, understanding our social location is very important in equity, diversity, and inclusion. A lot of this work begins with you. It begins with ourselves. So I lead with that. I lead with that understanding. And I think that as we proceed in this session, you will hear me speak very specific about ourselves versus others. So, you know, I preface it by saying that a lot of the helpful tips, I hope helpful tips, will be centered around an individual perspective and how we can then eventually come together as a community to make a collective action.
Yeah, I do agree. It's very important to have a collective action. One person cannot accomplish. And also, I like the highlight of not about I or me. It's about we.
Yes, absolutely.
Change the me to we, the W.
Yeah, I love that. Yes.
Yeah, I like it. In order to focus in your EDI, I know you have already very experience of like over decades of experience focusing on social justice and also anti-racism. Can you share more? How can we raise awareness against bias, especially workplace? Of course, personal life is very important too.
Yes, no, thank you for that question, Agnes. I think that it's funny when you said, you know, workplace, but yeah, personal. And it's important to understand that we cannot cut pieces of ourselves and bring them into certain spaces, and that we naturally maneuver in the world with various identities that we belong to, and nothing can really be left behind. So I think in the context of bias, and just, you know, in the spirit of International Women's Day, I'm going to speak very specifically to women. I believe that we must see women in all of our intersections, that this work is extremely important for us to understand intersectionality. So I want us to think about bias. And I'm actually speaking to everyone that is watching, whether you're here in this meeting live or you're watching this at a later date. I want you to think about the story that you're making up in your head about us, Agnes and myself. So I want you to think about what are the hints that are coming at you that's supporting the story that you have in your mind. Is it the clothing that we're wearing? Mm-hmm. Is it the way that our hair is? Is it our names? Is it the color of our skin? Is it our gender presentation? Is it our Zoom background? You know, what information are you gathering? And what is it translating to you? And I'll even go further and say, what stereotypes are informing your understanding of us and others around you? So this thing, bias, you know, it's all around us. You know, we experience it. We also do it to others, you know, so bias alone isn't the problem. It's bias and unification with power and privilege. And if the action that comes out of it is discrimination, and this is when, you know, it becomes stickier. This is when it becomes problematic. And therefore, that's what we must combat together.
I really like how you used a real example. Yeah, perhaps someone already have bias of why is it you choose this background? Why is it not like Shari, a plain background? Something like that. That can be a bias, and that is a stereotype from where we learn our experience. Very, very good point. So we need to pay attention to what we are looking at, and then ask ourselves some question, and then reflect on how we react to certain kind of thing. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know what, Agnes, I will also add that, you know, when we think about bias and gender bias or gender equality, like women are not immune to bias, you know, and we also do it to each other. So, you know, if time permits, you know, I would love for us to do a quick exercise so I can truly understand, so that we can do this together and be on the same page.
Okay.
And again, you won't have to share anything, but this is an exercise for everyone to think about where maybe they can position themselves when we continue in this conversation around bias and stereotype. So I want you to identify one of your social identities that provides you privilege. So that could be your race, citizenship, ethnicity, your sexual orientation, class or SES, socioeconomic status, or your ability, whether that be physical or cognitive, or both. What factor gives you privilege? So you just think about it really quick. You don't have to answer.
Oh, I don't have to answer, right?
You don't have to answer. This could absolutely be something for yourself. And I'll tell you why. And I'm happy just to share to give folks an understanding as to why I'm asking this question. My physical ability is a privilege. It's an unearned advantage to be able to physically maneuver around the world and go places without a second thought. You know, I do not have to worry about stairs or accessible bathrooms or transportation. I have the privilege to enter spaces without fear that I may have a physical challenge getting in. Acknowledging this privilege matter in the conversation about bias, you know, and it matters because first, by acknowledging your privilege, it is for you to understand that it is not to be looked upon as a burden or something that makes you defensive once identified, but it should be seen as an opportunity, you know, to work towards a more just and inclusive world, you know, with, you know, because now you have this clear understanding of your own positionality. So, you know, doing an exercise like this will help you grow a critical, reflective practice. And that's one of the key pieces of mitigating bias is to critically reflect. You know, this is how we can really break it down in the workplace or in any other arena of your life. But it begins with us first. You know, so it's important for folks to recognize that it's not only gender that must be highlighted in our fight towards equity, but it's the intersectionality of women and our overlapping identities that, you know, also needs to be considered.
So can you give me an example that you coach someone to be aware of bias and someone really can successfully, I can practice this kind of exercise and the next time the bias kind of like maybe gradually disappear.
Right. And I love that you said gradually, because these things can't just happen like this.
Exactly.
And that's why I call it a practice. It's a process. It takes time, just like anything, right? So, you know, Agnes, first things first, very specific, self-reflection is extremely important. Intentionally building community with other women, engaging in intercultural connections are significant in this work. So it's essentially becoming aware of ourselves and others, you know, and also like, do not center your own experience and set a set of beliefs and understanding of the world to be absolute. You know, I think that will definitely create barriers and box you in and not allow you to have that growth mindset that's needed. And here's a little piece, and maybe folks can, you know, do further research on their own, but it's important for folks to engage in transformative learning, you know, and I'll just say something a little bit brief about transformative learning. Basically, it's rich, it's coming face to face with a disorienting dilemma, like something that's shocking that you just didn't realize that was a thing, or you didn't understand, it was in your purview, it's not something that you think about, but someone say something, an incident occurred and it's been brought to your attention, something that totally is opposite of what you think. Okay, so that's the disorienting dilemma. And it's important for us to come to terms that the thought or belief that we held may not be accurate, you know? So after you come to terms with that and you realize, whoa, like this is different, this should propel you to start thinking about your connection to that particular dilemma, whether that dilemma is, you know, has, you know, is a focus on racism or ageism or ableism, whatever that dilemma is that has just been brought to your realization. But it's propelling you to start thinking about and examining your beliefs. And then once you've done that, this will lead you to reassess your own perspective while reflecting on this new perspective that you've just received because of this incident. In order to learn and have that transformative learning take place, it is super important for you to have consider a course of action. You have to plan to fully understand the problem or situation. So this may mean doing some research, reading, dialoguing, connecting with folks that are different from you, and experience new things in order to build a new and, I think, better understanding of the world and, those you share the world with. And through these interactions and actions, you will transform. And I believe this process will absolutely help mitigate bias.
How to take action to embrace different values. Bias always come from, because different values. So I only focus on my values. So sometimes there will be some bias. We will overlook people's difference. Is there any advice you can give us about how we can take action?
Yeah, and again, another wonderful question, Agnes. Be open to learn and give space to other women. If you are in a position of power, create opportunities for other women, especially those that are different from you or may not match up with the status quo or the company norm. Bias is huge in the workplace and influences decision-making. So many people are in the business of finding candidates or employees that are similar to them and hold what we call an affinity bias. And an affinity bias is when we gravitate towards people like ourselves, whether that be in appearance, beliefs, background. And the reason why affinity bias is really not great is because then we may even avoid or even dislike people who are different from us. So challenging that kind of bias is extremely important, because if you engage in this selection practice, it excludes a wide range of folks that may be different, but talented and can bring enormous amount of value to your organization. So, like I said, women are not immune to this form of selection bias, and therefore it requires intention and self-awareness, as some of the things that you've already pointed out, Agnes. So, I think I would leave you all with a few tips to counter bias, that will also encourage inclusion and embracing different values. So the first thing is stereotype replacement. This is an intentional action for you to consciously replace stereotypical beliefs and replace it with accurate information. So exactly what you're experiencing now, exactly who you're seeing right now, and not going into your little mind space where you're trying to build a connection or trying to connect it to something that may not be real. It's just something maybe you've seen in the media, or maybe someone had told you about, but really truly being present and individualizing the person that's in front of you. When you find yourself making judgments, continue to speak to that person, continue to engage so that you can really learn from what's taking place in that moment and what's being conversed about. Challenge yourself, think about the decisions you make and what groups you center in the workspaces. Individuals and organizations can, and they will grow and change, but it doesn't happen overnight. And it is an ongoing practice. So I stress a lot about practice. And, I'm reminded actually by a quote that I once heard from Dr. 𝑁𝒉𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂 that I've kind of remixed a bit. And he said that, leadership work is people work. If you can't see and love them, you can't lead them. So with that, I would say, listen to others' experiences, keep learning and stay informed, be willing to take risks and willing to make mistakes, and keep trying to do the right thing.
Mhm.
So we will make mistakes. It's not if, it's when we make a mistake. You know, be open to apologize, be humble to apologize and to learn further, and never stop being self-reflective and flexible as you proceed on this journey called life.
What I really like is always be conscious and always be reflective. And in our dialogue with others, we can always find out, is there anything that, is it real? Or is it only stereotype? I really like these points. I would like you to give us a last piece of advice to all women who are working so hard every day. One advice, what is your advice?
Okay, my one advice to all women for our International Women's Day is, in order to break the bias, I need us all, including myself, to see women in all of our intersections. And we need to unite more than anything, more than ever right now, to help dismantle various systems of oppressions that are specifically targeted to women, whether they be women of color, whether they be women with disabilities, whether they be women with low SES that are then more likely to be doing precarious work and not have the right benefits and health. There's so many intersections. So that's why I say for this year, for the call to action is to see women in all of our intersections.
Thank you so much, Shari, for your sharing. I would like to end today's sharing with a quote from Catherine Persiva. We are all different, which is great because we are all unique. Difference is great. Without diversity, life would be very boring. I think it's very straightforward quote and it's so true. So thank you very much once again. It's my really big honor to have invited you to join me at my program, Shari, and I wish you a healthy and happy life in Toronto and continue to empower more people at your university work. Thank you very much. So see everyone. I wish everyone a happy and empowering, fulfilling, happy Women's Day. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Agnes.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.